The grand chamber of the Union of Civilizations, a vast hall draped in the banners of 100 alien races, was eerily quiet. At its center, seated around a long table, were the representatives of every major power in the galaxy. They shifted nervously in their seats, casting uncertain glances at one another, but none could hold their gaze on the man standing at the far end of the room. The ambassador of Earth stood still, his face a mask of stone. His sharp eyes scanned the assembly, betraying nothing, not the anger simmering beneath the surface, nor the satisfaction of the moment. It was impossible to tell what thoughts churned behind his cool demeanor, and that, more than anything, unsettled the gathered diplomats. At the center of the table, the chairman of the Union, a tall, spindly alien with pale blue skin and for iridescent eyes, cleared his throat. "Greetings, Ambassador," he began. "We are honored to have you here with us on this momentous occasion, as the Terran Empire joins our Union of Civilizations." The human did not respond, his gaze unwavering. The chairman's discomfort grew, his long fingers fidgeting with a ceremonial document before him. The silence in the room stretched, growing heavier with every second. "To commemorate this historic moment," the chairman continued, "we have completed negotiations on the treaty. All that remains is ratification by the member states." He lifted the document, displaying it with a flourish, though the gesture fell flat against the tension hanging in the air. "It would be my honor to be the first to welcome your mighty empire into our union," he said, his voice regaining some strength as he pressed his sigil into the parchment. One by one, the document was passed down the table. Each alien ambassador, in turn, made their mark. Some did so with a curt nod, others with visible reluctance. Half-hearted remarks of welcome were murmured, but most could not hide their distaste. The treaty moved steadily down the line until it stopped in front of a towering reptilian alien with mottled green scales and a face set in a permanent snarl. He didn't touch the document. "This is madness," the reptilian hissed. He cast a scornful gaze around the room before letting out a guttural snarl. "How can we think of allowing these barbarians to stand among us as equals?" His voice rose, sharp and accusing, like the snap of a whip. The chairman raised a placating hand, his eyes darting nervously toward the human ambassador. "Peace, Ambassador Vorik. We have already agreed." "You agreed," Vorik interrupted, his long tail lashing the floor. "None of you have suffered as we have. 24 nursery planets gone, reduced to cinders, rendered uninhabitable by their machines of war." A murmur rippled through the room, though no one dared speak. All eyes shifted toward the human ambassador. He remained still, his expression unchanged as he finally spoke. "You attacked Earth." Vorik's nostrils flared, his sharp teeth bared in a mocking sneer. "A few 100,000 humans dead at most. And for that, you wiped out generations of my kind. Entire broods culled before they even hatched." His voice rose to a roar, echoing through the chamber. "Never has such barbarism been committed in the history of the Union. And now you expect us to welcome you? You demand we follow your precious rules of war, yet cast them aside the moment they no longer suit you. By your own laws, you would be war criminals." The human's eyes narrowed, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You attacked Earth." The room fell deathly silent. No one moved as the human stepped forward, his measured, deliberate pace drawing every gaze. Vorik, for all his fury, took an involuntary step back. The human ambassador stopped at the edge of the table, leaning forward, his hands pressed firmly against its surface. His presence loomed large, his eyes locked onto the reptilian's unblinking. "When we first met you," the human said, "we extended a hand of peace, and you spat in our face. You attacked Earth. Never ever attack Earth again." Vorik's eyes flickered with uncertainty, his bravado faltering. The human straightened, but the intensity in his voice remained. "We had been a spacefaring race for barely 3 centuries, our colonies few and scattered. We were divided, nations, corporations, all vying for power. And then you gave us something to unite against. You attacked Earth, and we found common purpose. Your aggression forged a new enemy, one far more dangerous than you imagined. Bending down, the human retrieved the treaty from the floor where Vorik had tossed it. He slammed it back onto the table, causing the other ambassadors to flinch. Do you know why we have these rules of war? Because our history is written in blood. We've enslaved, slaughtered, and annihilated our own. These rules exist to protect us from ourselves. But there's nothing in them about how we should treat a hostile alien race that dares attack our homeworld. The words hung in the air, cold and threatening. The reptilian ambassador's scales paled as he realized the gravity of the moment. He looked away, breaking under the human's relentless gaze. The human ambassador pushed the treaty toward him. This document binds us to the same rules that have kept us from destroying ourselves. Sign it, or you'll find out why we need so many rules. Vorik's hand shook as he took up the document, scrawling his mark with bitter reluctance. Good, the human said, his tone final. It seems my business here is concluded. Without another word, the ambassador turned and strode from the room, the heavy doors closing behind him with a dull thud. The gathered diplomats remained frozen in their seats, still holding their breath. The air in the chamber remained thick with the unease that followed the human ambassador's exit. No one spoke. Eyes flickered toward the door as though expecting him to return at any moment. Vorik, still seated and visibly shaken, stared at the treaty in front of him, claws flexing in silent frustration. I told you, Vorik muttered. They're monsters. The chairman, his blue skin shimmering under the room's lights, sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. Perhaps, but they are monsters bound by rules now, like the rest of us. Vorik's eyes narrowed. Do you really believe that? You saw what they did. These so-called rules didn't stop them from laying waste to our nursery planets, burning our future to ash. The chairman tilted his head, considering the reptilian's words. His four eyes blinked in unison, reflecting the gravity of the conversation. You provoked them. Earth may have been an isolated backwater, but humans, they are not what we thought. Vorik sneered. And what are they, then? Beasts cloaked in diplomacy? You heard him speak. He as much as admitted it. Their history is soaked in blood. They thrive on violence. They were divided once, the chairman replied. They fought amongst themselves, their world torn apart by centuries of war. But the day we arrived, they found something greater to fight for. The words hung in the air, resonating with the quiet dread that had settled over the chamber. The chairman continued. When we first encountered them, they were fractured, petty nations squabbling for dominance. We assumed they would be easy to manipulate, perhaps even easy to subjugate. But then we attacked Earth. Vorik's sneer returned. We should have wiped them out when we had the chance. And paid the price? The chairman's voice sharpened. Do not forget, your species started this war, believing them weak. And in return, they responded with fire, with fury unlike anything we've seen before. You decimated a fraction of their population, and in return, they ravaged your worlds. Entire systems turned to cinders. Do you think any of us could survive that kind of wrath? The other ambassadors remained silent, their eyes avoiding Vorik's. The reality of Earth's retaliation was etched into their minds. The scorched planets, the lifeless stars where once thriving systems had existed. For every life lost on Earth, tenfold were taken in return. Vorik's defiance faltered, but he refused to back down completely. They have no restraint. They annihilate without mercy. And now you want to bind them to us, expecting their savagery can be tamed. The chairman leaned forward. You misunderstand them. Their savagery is not mindless. It is deliberate, and it is controlled. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. That ambassador spoke truthfully when he said their history is written in blood. Humanity has always been on the brink of self-destruction. The rules of war they so carefully crafted were not out of some noble ideal. They were born from necessity. Without those rules, they would have wiped themselves out centuries ago. The reptilian scales twitched in agitation, but he said nothing, allowing the chairman to continue. The reason humanity is so dangerous, Vorik, is because they know exactly what they're capable of. They've seen their own darkness. Every one of their wars has driven them to the edge of extinction, and every time they've pulled back just enough to survive. Their entire civilization is built on this delicate balance, always pushing forward, always hungry for more, but never quite falling over the precipice, until you came along and gave them a reason to stop holding back. The chamber seemed to grow colder as the implications of those words settled over the gathered aliens. The humans were not like any other species they had encountered. The Union had survived countless conflicts with its member species, all governed by ancient codes of honor and battle. But humanity had rewritten those codes, forged by blood and steel in their relentless pursuit of survival. And now, the chairman continued, they've found a new enemy. You saw how the ambassador spoke of unity. Your attack on Earth united them in a way nothing ever has. Do you think they'll stop with the treaty? This document merely buys us time. The Terran Empire is young, but it is growing. Fast. And if we don't bring them into the fold, if we don't give them a place in this union, they will create their own and burn anyone who stands in their way. Vorik let out a low growl. And what happens when they decide the Union is no longer useful to them? When they outgrow us? The chairman met his gaze with a steady calm. That is why we must bind them now, while we still can. Humanity respects strength. As long as we show strength through unity, they will have reason to respect us. But if we push them away, we will be giving them every reason to see us as enemies. The room fell silent once more, the tension thickening. Each ambassador wrestled with the uncomfortable truth the chairman had laid bare. Earth's entrance into the Union was not just an alliance. It was a desperate act of self-preservation. To confront humanity was to risk annihilation, but to welcome them meant navigating a perilous path between cooperation and destruction. Vorik looked down at the treaty he had signed, his claws flexing again, this time in quiet resignation. They will destroy us one day. Mark my words. The chairman nodded slowly. Perhaps. But for now, we survive. And with that, the discussion ended, the uneasy peace of the Union now resting on the fragile balance of human ambition and alien fear. As the heavy doors of the chamber sealed shut behind the human ambassador, a collective breath escaped the room. The tension that had held the air in a vice finally loosened, though it left behind an unsettling quiet. No one dared to speak at first, the weight of the encounter still pressing down on the diplomats like a suffocating fog. It was a representative from the Direct Combine, a spindly creature with translucent skin, who broke the silence. "What a ghastly species," it murmured, its voice a rasp of unease. The others nodded in reluctant agreement, though none seemed eager to voice what everyone was thinking. The display they had just witnessed was not simply a political power play. It was a stark reminder of what humanity had become. Across the table, Vorik, still seated, his scaled hands resting heavily on the treaty, let out a low, rumbling growl. "We should never have agreed to this. Letting them into the Union is a mistake." His slit eyes scanned the room, challenging anyone to disagree. A few of the diplomats exchanged glances, but it was the chairman who answered, his tone weary but resolute. "And what would you have us do, Vorik? The combined might of our Union could indeed crush the Terran Empire." He paused, letting the idea sink in before continuing. "But at what cost? You know as well as anyone that war with humanity is not a victory. It's survival at best." Vorik's tail flicked in frustration, his anger evident. They annihilated 24 of our nursery planets, scorched the land beyond recovery for generations. How can we sit here, negotiating with those butchers, while our worlds still burn? The chairman's eyes narrowed slightly, because they will burn more worlds if we don't. The simple, cold truth hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications. The Union had never faced an enemy like Earth, an enemy that did not simply fight to win but fought to destroy, to erase. A species with no qualms about retaliation, so devastating that the galaxy itself would tremble before it. The diplomat from the Zenati clans, a being covered in swirling patterns of bioluminescent skin, spoke next, their voice smooth but laced with unease. You saw their ambassador. He spoke of their rules of war, a concept they claimed to have followed for centuries. Yet the same rules seemed to vanish the moment they're provoked. They are predators, nothing more, Vorik snapped. This entire farce is a means to lull us into complacency. They'll spread like a plague through the stars, and by the time we realize what's happening, it will be too late. The chairman sighed. We bought ourselves time. This treaty binds them, at least in theory, to the same laws that govern us all. As long as they adhere to these rules, we have leverage. Leverage? Vorik scoffed. You're deluding yourself. The only leverage we have is fear, their fear of retribution. But what happens when that fear is no longer enough? When they grow stronger, more unified, they don't fight like us. They never did. The room fell quiet again. The truth in Vorik's words was undeniable. Humanity had always been an outlier, a species forged in conflict, tempered by endless wars on their own planet long before they reached the stars. Their unity was not a product of diplomacy, but of necessity, born from a shared history of violence, an instinct to survive at all costs. We should have crushed them when we had the chance. Vorik continued, voice low and bitter. They were nothing when we first encountered them, just a fractured species barely out of their atmosphere. But now we've allowed them to grow into something far more dangerous. The chairman's gaze hardened, his usually calm demeanor giving way to a flicker of irritation. You forget, Vorik, that your people were the ones who attacked Earth first. Had you left them in peace, we might not be having this discussion. Vorik bared his teeth, the anger flaring once more. And we paid the price, didn't we? We lost more than I can ever recover. You did, the chairman replied, his tone measured again. But starting a war with them now, after everything we've seen, would cost us all far more. The diplomat from the Zenati clans leaned forward, their voice tinged with reluctant agreement. The chairman is right. Fighting humanity head-on is no longer an option. Their capacity for destruction is unlike anything we've seen. We must find another way to deal with them, whether that's through diplomacy, containment, or something else. And what would that be? Vorik's voice was dripping with venom. Civilizing them? Taming them? Like some wild beast. The chairman's eyes darkened. Perhaps we cannot tame them, but we can keep them in check, at least for now. This treaty is the first step in controlling the threat they pose. We've bound them to the same rules that govern us all, and as long as they respect those rules, we have a chance to maintain the peace. The reptilian's claws scraped against the table, his frustration barely contained. Peace, he spat. There will be no peace with a species like that. They are rabid. It's only a matter of time before they turn on us. The chairman stood, his posture one of finality. Maybe, but we'll deal with that when the time comes. For now, this treaty stands, and so does the fragile peace we've managed to secure. We all know what's at stake. The room descended into a heavy silence once more, each ambassador grappling with the same unspoken fear. That this peace was not the beginning of cooperation, but a prelude to something far worse. As the chairman moved toward the door, he spoke one final time. Mark my words, Vorik. Humanity will spread, and they will grow stronger. But we must be wise. We cannot confront them now, not when the cost of failure is extinction. And with that, he exited the chamber, leaving the diplomats to contemplate a future where peace was merely a temporary illusion.